We now begin with module 3.1 for our batch review. This is animal reproduction. And just like in the previous discussion, we will be comparing the asexual reproduction and then the sexual reproduction in animals. So let's review that. What are the four ways animals undergo asexual reproduction? Don't forget PBFF. And what's that? Parthenogenesis, budding, fission, and also fragmentation. So this is very easy to remember. Now when we talk about parthenogenesis, just remember partheno means virgin and genesis would be the origin or the beginning. So the organisms would be coming from females. So for example, honeybees, and some instances induce a bee population to reproduce through parthenogenesis, and this is an asexual mode of reproduction wherein haploid ova get to be fertilized even without the presence of sperm cells. So this is not sexual reproduction but rather asexual reproduction because only one parent is needed. So as you can see in the picture, not fertilized ovum become drones, while fertilized with the presence of sperm cell become either workers or queen bees. Parthenogenesis, again, where females can reproduce even without the presence of a male to mate with. So we have an example here which is Aspidocelis uniparents. So this would be indeed one parent only. So this is an example of vertebrate that will be undergoing parthenogenesis. No presence of sperm needed to produce the next generation. Now, the process of sexual reproduction will also have other forms. We have here what we call as a diploid parthenogenesis. So this is very interesting. In diploid parthenogenesis, so parthenogenesis, the female would produce the next generation and offspring without the male, but in this case, this is diploid. A while ago, we were talking about haploid, like the bees. So in diploid parthenogenesis, one example is automixis, wherein the meiosis, or wherein a cell undergoing meiosis will produce an oocyte, which is haploid, which then undergoes chromosomal replication. So the number of chromosomes in the ovum or oocyte itself will duplicate, producing a diploid zygote, which then develops into a diploid individual. So that is what we call diploid parthenogenesis, because the oocyte, which is haploid, became diploid, in this case by chromosome replication. There's another one here wherein the oocyte will fuse with another oocyte, so N plus N now becomes 2N, producing a diploid zygote. So this is diploid parthenogenesis, later producing the diploid individual. So remember, automixis produces diploid zygote either by chromosome replication or fusing with another oocyte. Another type of diploid parthenogenesis is apomixis. In this case, the cells will undergo mitosis to produce female egg cell that is already diploid, and then it will become a diploid egg, which develop into a diploid individual. So in this case, males are still not needed because automatically the germ cell will produce female egg cells that are already diploid to produce diploid individual. Diploid parthenogenesis, no sperm cells are needed. And then comparing that with sexual reproduction, as you guys all see this already, that the oocyte haploid fuses with the spermatocyte haploid, produces the diploid zygote, produces a diploid individual. So we're very familiar. We talked about a while ago the diploid parthenogenesis, and we're more familiar with the haploid parthenogenesis, wherein the germ cell undergoes meiosis and then it produces an oocyte. The oocyte is triggered to become a haploid zygote, and then it becomes a haploid individual. So in this case, haploid parthenogenesis because the individual is haploid. The other one we talked about, diploid parthenogenesis, because the individual produced would be diploid. Both, no sperms needed. All right. So let's talk about another one. So after parthenogenesis, let's talk about fission. Fission is simply splitting the organism into half. You can see over here. So we can see the sea anemone that are dividing from each other. So this is an example of fission. Another asexual reproduction in animals is budding. So this is an example from the hydra. So in this case, an individual can grow an extension or an outgrowth that eventually detaches and grow apart from the main body. So a bud will be growing out from the side, becoming a new individual, which will then detach itself. So just like this, as you can see here, a bud grows and then eventually becomes a new hydra. Another example would be fragmentation. This is wherein a broken part of an organism then grows into new individuals through regeneration of lost tissue. Just like in the sea star, you will see that there is a small portion detached or fragmented, which grows into a new individual, while the original parent where the fragment was taken out from or detached from will regenerate that broken part to produce the whole organism. Okay, so that's fragmentation. So as you can see here, it's very familiar with us. So it becomes a new individual from a fragment of the sea star. So here's a video that you can see. Indeed, you can see that that will be later growing some parts. Let us see here. So the fragment has grown some parts. So fragmentation is an example of asexual reproduction in animals. Okay, also another example would be for the planaria. So you can see here several pieces, but each of the parts will later regenerate into a new planaria. So that's an example of fragmentation. So again, the question we talked about, asexual strategies, will this ensure continuous and healthy survival of the colony? Well, the answer would be no, because it will be advantageous if the environment remains the same, it doesn't change. However, when the environment suddenly changes, then since all of the species are clones of themselves or clones of the are clones, then they are only adapted to one particular environment. So they will be wiped out if the environment suddenly changes. Unlike sexual reproduction, wherein it produces a variety of individuals in a species, even if the environment changes, you can be assured that at least a small portion can still remain alive to continue the species, because somehow the variation may give them adaptation to that particular change in environment. Okay, so we're done with the asexual reproduction. Let's now proceed with sexual reproduction in animals. And we're already familiar with this. We talked about this over and over again. So the most important thing, fusion of gametes, and then the resulting organism are genetically different from their parents. So you have here a diploid female undergoing meiosis producing the egg, haploid, the diploid male undergoing meiosis producing the haploid sperm cells, which will fertilize together to produce your diploid embryo, later becoming a new individual. So this can be found in the gonads, the testes, and the ovaries as well. Okay, so these are the organs that makes the gamete. What's the advantage of sexual reproduction? We answered this already. Because of the variety of the offspring produced, it can at least ensure that some individuals will remain alive even if the environment changes. Which is male and female? So you already know this one. This is a hermaphrodite. So one individual contains both the male and the female structure. This is very important because this will allow, for example, earthworms that have a very high difficulty of meeting each other to still continue the species even if there is no mate present. However, of course, what is more advantageous, copulation or self-fertilization? Well, of course, the answer will still be self-fertilization, will be copulation, because self-fertilization essentially is fertilizing itself, which produce clones. So when the environment changes, then the species might all be wiped out. Unlike copulation, which is sexual reproduction, again, produces variety of offspring that can adapt to changes in the environment. So that's hermaphroditism. They have both male and female gametes, male and female structure. So let's talk about fertilization. Now for fertilization, it's also very familiar, internal fertilization and external fertilization. So for external fertilization, the egg cells are released by the female outside of the body. So fertilization happens outside, while later we will look at the internal. So here are some examples of that. So the egg cells, the zygote will be found floating around, for example, like this in the aquatic region near plants. So this is an example of external fertilization. Internal fertilization is particularly important for terrestrial animals because egg cells and sperm cells actually need a moist environment to survive. So being in a terrestrial environment, the sperm cell will not be able to move towards the egg cell because it will die immediately once the sperm cell lands on ground. So it has to be deposited inside of the female reproductive tract. That's why there is what we call as internal fertilization. So this occurs inside of the female and then requires the act of mating or copulation or intercourse. Okay, so you already know this as well. The following organisms have external, internal modes of fertilization. So external, external, internal, and the reason it's internal because it's a terrestrial, while the previous two would be in aquatic environment. This is external, aquatic environment. Internal because terrestrial environment, and that's it. Now let's proceed with the last portion, which is mode of reproduction in animals. So what happens here? So in this case, for oviparous, ovoviviparous, and viviparous organisms, you have the following. So when we talk about oviparous organisms, these are organisms that would be producing eggs. So there's, remember, eggs are produced. When we talk about viviparous, live organisms are produced. No eggs, only live. When we talk about ovoviviparous, this means that eggs are produced inside, which then hatches also inside, and then gives birth to live organisms. So it's a combination of the ovi and the viviparous. Okay? So we already know that oviparous, fertilized eggs, ovoviparity, ovoviviparity, eggs inside, hatches, and then gives birth to live organism, and viviparous gives birth to live organism. So are the following oviparous, ovoviviparous, or viviparous? You know this already from our previous discussion. Viviparous, oviparous because it's egg laying, oviparous because egg laying, viviparous gives birth to living offspring, and of course ovoviviparous, which is generally speaking the characteristic of sharks. Alright, let's just go through this very fast. This would be the reproduction among the different animal phyla. So you have poriferans, sea sponges. The mode of asexual reproduction is fragmentation. The mode of sexual reproduction for sea sponges are sequential hermaphroditism. So one time sperm cells are produced, the next time egg cells are produced. For jellyfishes like cnidarians, asexual reproduction would be fission and budding. Sexual reproduction would be asexually produced medusae produce gametes that will be fusing, developing the polyp. Okay, so gametes are still produced. Rotiferans, rotifers, parthenogenesis for asexual reproduction, and for sexual reproduction they are dioecious. Female produce eggs, males produce sperms, and then dimorphic, females are 10 times bigger than males. So the males can be distinguished from the females, and dioecious means that they have separate individuals for a male separated from the female. Annelids, earthworms, leeches, they have fission and budding, surprisingly, and most are monoecious. There are hermaphrodites, although some are dioecious. So here are examples of the annelid budding and then the annelid fission. You can see that. Oh, and also the earthworms, there will be sexual reproduction. For nematodes, roundworms or ascaris, some can undergo parthenogenesis. Most are dioecious, some are monoecious or hermaphrodites. So Finally, we go to the last stretch of the table. So platyhelminths or tapeworms or planaria undergo fission and are hermaphroditic. Mollusks like snails, squids, octopus, and bivalves. What kind of asexual reproduction? Well, none at all. What kind of sexual reproduction? They are dioecious, others are monoecious, hermaphrodites, and there is internal and also external fertilization. For the echinoderms like caesars, sea urchins, fragmentation for asexual reproduction, and they are true hermaphrodites, and some are sequential hermaphrodites. For the arthropods, insects and spiders, crustaceans, the asexual reproduction is parthenogenesis for some, and they are dioecious for terrestrial species, internal fertilization, and aquatic species are internal and external fertilization. Finally, you have the chordates, mammals, reptiles, amphibians, birds, and fishes. So no asexual reproduction, generally speaking, and often dioecious, internal fertilization for terrestrial and internal and external fertilization for aquatic species. And that ends the discussion for 3.1.